Hey everybody, this is Jeremy Siskin. Today I want to talk with you about mastering major scales. And the whole idea here is that, major scales are things that everybody knows, hopefully. If you don't know them, start learning your major scales. But it's just impossible to know them well enough because they just come up in so many different ways as you're learning to improvise. And so usually students come to me and they ask, what new scales can I learn? And I'm happy to teach about new scales, but my response is usually that really instead of learning new scales, you should just go deeper and deeper on major scales. So today I want to show you kind of 3 steps that you can take with a major scale to get to know it even better. But first, announcements. My book, Playing Solo Jazz Piano, always available on jeremysiskin.com. I really appreciate it when you buy it directly from me. I'm also offering a class that now starts in less than a month. It's very, very affordable, and you can learn more at jeremysiskin.com/jazzclass. And then thirdly, I've added a link. If you want to sign up for a private lesson, you can now click the link right in the comments. Is that what it's called? The description for this YouTube video, and choose a time and have a private lesson with me. So I hope to meet some of you face to face. All right, so mastering major scales. So, if you've grown up with a classical background, you're probably used to, playing major scales up and down. Maybe you practice them in dotted rhythms or staccato or something like that. The first thing that we want to do is practice scale patterns. And this is kind of dry practice, but it's so important. Because if we're looking to take that same E-flat major scale and make a melody, of course we're not just going to be playing it up and down. That's not going to make a very interesting or good melody. We want to be able to leap within the scale, change directions, use a variety of intervals, create some different shapes. We want to be totally flexible within this scale. So the first thing that I would do is I would practice using different intervals. So by intervals, what I mean is we're going to skip a different number of notes between, and we're going to add notes to each of the notes of the scale. So from the E flat, we're going to skip one note, go to the F. Ooh. From the E flat, I'll try that again. From the E flat, we're going to skip the F and we're going to go to the G. And starting in the F, we'll skip one note and go to the A flat. From the G, we'll skip one note, go to the B flat. This is probably a familiar sound for a lot of you. We could say that, in this case, we're practicing the scale in thirds. And you might be wondering, how do you know which note to skip? We're always taking the key signature of the scale. So I'm skipping the F to get to the G, skipping the G to get to the A flat, skipping the A flat to get to the B flat, etc. So you want to be able probably the first thing that you're wondering is, what about fingering? And I actually don't like giving specific fingering for these scale patterns for 2 reasons. One is that, I feel like people just obsess about the fingering if that's the thing. But the second reason is that, you want to be flexible with your fingering as you're improvising. So you want to kind of be able to come up with it by yourself. The one thing I will kind of recommend is to not just use the same 2 fingers over and over again. It's possible, you could do thumb 3, thumb 3, thumb 3, but that's going to be like your least efficient option. You want to try to use all 5 fingers as you play so that you minimize the amount of times you have to change hand position. So I'm not sure that there's a right or wrong fingering here, but I would suggest that you use more than 2 fingers. So after you do your third, skipping just 1 note in the scale, then practice skipping 2 notes in the scale. We can call these fourths. The one that always gets people is this fourth between the 4th scale degree and the 7th scale degree, because that's an augmented fourth, sometimes called a tritone. So it sounds different than all of the other ones that are perfect fourth intervals. So remember, we're not doing exactly all the same intervals. We're not trying to do all perfect fourths. We're always just skipping 2 notes in the scale. From there, we would go to fifths, skipping 3 notes in the scale. 6 notes, etc. And the more that you do this, the easier that it will get. The more that you'll be able to kind of see the topography of the scale and figure out what the next note is. If you get really good at that, or if you are already really good at that, you could try stacked intervals, or you could think of these as chords. So you could stack 2/3 on top of each other, and that makes a triad. Right? Or you could stack a third plus a fourth, which actually makes a first inversion triad. Or what about a fourth on bottom and a third on top makes a second inversion triad? Or if you stack 3/3, you get a seventh chord. So you can really experiment with different kinds of stacked intervals. They'll all create different kinds of chords, maybe in some different inversions. And then you can also practice changing directions. There's a lot of ways to do this. One way is to take those original interval exercises and reverse every other pair. So instead of going up twice, you go up, down. And that creates some fingering challenges. And then the same thing. Right? Or I like leaping different intervals and then doing the scale back. So here I'm leaping up a fourth and then playing the scale back down. I could do the same thing leaping up a fifth. Excuse me. Or up a sixth. Which presents all kinds of fingering challenges. So those are some examples of scale patterns. They're just taking those scales and looking at them from every possible angle so that you start getting the scales under your fingers. Now, to test whether or not you actually have the scales under your fingers, I recommend playing what I call my scale game. Now, here's the rules of the scale game. You're going to put on your metronome. I'm going to get out my metronome here. I'm going to start at quarter note equals 100, let's say. Let's see. This might be attached to my Bluetooth headphones. All right, I'm just gonna tap instead of using the metronome. Technical difficulties, right? And I'm gonna play a note every eighth note. And since I'm focusing on the E flat major scale, I'm going to play only notes from the E flat major scale. And in this scale game, I'm gonna try to be as, let's say, random or varied as possible. Not just playing a pattern, not just playing the scale up and down. That's kind of cheating. So I want to just improvise. So I'm playing all notes of the E flat major scale. Can I tap, play, and talk? I think I can. And remember, the ways I can lose this game is if I play a note outside of the scale. You heard that E natural, right? That's losing. Or if I stop, I can't find a note. As you're playing this game, make sure you're using a variety of intervals. A lot of people will just use kind of seconds and thirds and stay in a very close hand position. This is a really good chance to practice expanding your hand and using intervals even wider than an octave, but definitely fifths, sixths, sevenths. I recommend putting on a timer for about a minute and testing yourself and finding a tempo where maybe it's a challenge for you. You know, you want to be able to do this at just about any imaginable tempo, right? Here's the same E flat major scale, playing the scale game, much faster tempo, and my hand knows exactly where to go because I've practiced all those scale patterns so much that I don't really have to worry that much about hitting a wrong note as I play the scale. So that's a great way to test. Okay, how well do I actually know that scale? Can you push that metronome higher and higher until you have more and more mastery? And then to actually attach that to something musical, I recommend doing drone improvisation. And by drone improvisation, what I mean is that you can play a fifth in the lower register, and then improvise, again using only notes of that scale, and try to play phrases that you really like. I generally sing along with my drone improvisations. And I recommend setting a timer. See if you can do this for 5 minutes without going outside of the E flat major scale. How interesting can you keep it? Can you find ways to do sequences? Can you find ways to make expressive leaps to make your melody really beautiful? So that's it for today. Those are 3 ways to practice scales, starting with making sure that you practice scale patterns, because practicing scales just up and down is not really going to get you where you want to go if you're an improvising musician. Secondly, test yourself using the scale game. And then third, connect it to your ear and your heart by doing some drone improvisation and trying to play some phrases that you really like. Thanks so much for watching. Check out my book over here, Playing Solo Jazz Piano, from jeremysiskin.com, and like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.